Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Lamed Daled in Chullin. We are I'm gonna, 10 lines up from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Bet. And we are in the middle of answering the following question. Our Mishnah mentioned that if you slaughter an animal and no blood comes out, not only is it kosher, that's going to be surely true, but there is a concept of being maksher lekabel tuma, that something can become capable, food can become capable of being subject to tuma. And that happens when it is connected and touches one of seven liquids. One of those liquids is blood. And so, as a result, if in fact blood came out, well, then of course the meat that results is going to be capable of becoming tamei if somebody tamei touches it. But what we learned in our Mishnah is that if you, even though one has yadayim misoavos, unclean hands that need washing, they and therefore are considered tamei, that you can still eat this animal that you shechted where no blood came out because no blood has touched the meat, and therefore it's not capable of becoming tamei. And so when you touch it with your tamei hands, that's going to be fine. The problem with that understanding of our Mishnah is the following. The issue is that usually, first of all, our Mishnah is talking about Chullin, and we showed that with four different proofs yesterday. But usually, when you have Chullin, it is not capable of becoming Tameh past a Sheni, meaning that if you have something that is Tameh to the second degree, then it will not cause a problem and make Tameh food, regular chulin food, non-holy food. The only issues that a sheni can create are it can invalidate truma and it can make something that is actually holy into a shlishi l'tuma, and that shlishi l'tuma can also invalidate and cause a problem for kodesh, because kodesh matters all the way to the fourth degree. Truma matters all the way to the third degree, but chulin only matters to the second degree. So how come you wouldn't be able to eat this same food if the blood came out if your hands were dirty? It's still chulin food, and chulin food doesn't go past the second degree, and your hands, when they're dirty, are considered a second degree tuma. And of course, so as a reminder, that second degree tuma of your hands is only rabbinic, because biblically either your entire body is tameh or it's not. So and here it's just our hands, and so that's a rabbinic restriction that the rabbi said. Well, we're worried about you treating things in certain ways, and so as a result, we want your hands to be considered tameh, so that way you are more careful about that, where what they touch and where they go. So the answer that we gave one answer which was rejected, but then we gave another answer, the second answer, and the second answer worked. And the second answer was that it's specifically the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar holds that actually hands can, in certain circumstances, become a rishon latuma, such as if one were to stick one's hands into a home that had sarat on it, even though ordinarily, and the rabbis disagree and say that in every case that the hands are tameh, we treat them the same way, and they're always a sheni latuma. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says no. In the case of the tzarat house, if you stick them in, because your body would become a rishon latuma if you walked in, when your hands go in, we're going to treat them as a rishon latuma. And so it is possible to have dirty hands, meaning that it's a tuma de rabbanan of just one's hands, and it to cause a problem for the for Chullin. And so that was answer number one. Answer number two is going to raise a topic of what happens if you decide to treat Kodesh, Chulin food with a degree of Kedusha in order to get accustomed to being careful with that level of Kedusha. And so that's going to be the third answer that we're going to offer, and we're going to have effectively two versions of that answer in a moment. So let's pick up again the abbreviations at the end of the 10th to last line. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Oshaya. So what do they say? Hacha bechulin shenasu al taras hakodesh askinan. We're talking about where one deals with chulin in a way that is as if that chulin was kodesh, meaning as if it was sanctified in the Beit Hamikdash. And so as a result, when you commit to do that, so then your food will be treated as if it is Kodesh and capable of being a Shlishi and a Revi. So take a look in Rashi. We're the end of the 10th to last line in Rashi on Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. Al Taras HaKodesh. Kegon. Adam Haragil Le'echol Kachim. When you have somebody who is going to regularly eat Kodesh food, V'rotze liyot ragil tadir b'shmiras taratan, and he is concerned. He wants to make sure that he is used to and accustomed to being careful about every part of his body to ensure that he remains tahor. The shomer af chulin mikol tumaot haposlot b'kodesh. And so what does he do? He says that even my chulin, I am going to be careful about and ensure does not become invalidated, even if it were Kodesh. Ba'ashmi'inan desheni abed behu shlishi. And what we're learning as a result of this is that in that situation, your sheni food can, on your sheni hands, that is, can make that food even into a shlishi l'tuma that would be problematic, and you wouldn't be able to eat it. And so that's our situation. Udalo Rebbe Yoshua, and this viewpoint that says that when one is careful about chulin food at a level that says you're treating it like tahor kodesh food, that in that situation, Rebbe Yoshua would not apply the principle that your hands that are sheni could make that food into a shlishi. And how do I know that that's true? Ditznan, because we've got a Mishnah. This is the Vav in Mesoras Hashas notes that it should be Ditznan. And so, because it's a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Taharot, Mishnah Bet of Perek Bet. And so, let's see what the Mishnah says. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, and again, Rabbi Eliezer is the opinion that we're going to end up going like, as opposed to Rabbi Yoshua, who we say is disagreeing. Ha'ochel, ochel rishon, if you eat food, and this is all rabbinic. What we're about to discuss is all a rabbinic institution, because a person cannot become tameh other than from an av hatuma, and so not a rishon latuma. And so let's take a look and see. Ha'ochel, ochel rishon, if you eat food that is a rishon latuma, rishon. The rabbis say you become a rishon latuma. Sheni, if you eat food that is a sheni latuma, sheni, you will become a sheni latuma. Again, ordinarily, people don't become a sheni latuma. Shlishi, shlishi. And if you eat food that is a shlishi latuma, you become a shlishi. Now, clearly, because we're talking about shlishi, and we are not talking about a food that is prohibited to eat, we must be talking about chulin that is a shlishi. And as Rashi tells us, ha'ochel, ochel rishon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up in the Rashi. Ha'ochel, ochel rishon, nase gufo rishon. has it by eating the Rishon Latuma, that person has made himself into a Rishon Latuma himself. Liot magao sheni, so that now what he touches will become a sheni Latuma. Va'ochel ochel sheni nasa gufo sheni. When he eats something that is a sheni Latuma, he himself becomes a sheni Latuma. Liot mago shlishi, so that what he touches will now become a shlishi Latuma. Va'ochel shlishi shlishi. And similarly, if he eats something that is a shlishi Latuma, what he will become a shlishi. And by the way, what that means is that not that anything he touches will become a Revi, because there really is no such a thing as a Revi. But if he were to touch Kodesh, we would say that Kodesh is called Pasul. Okay? Because we don't use the term Tameh unless it is capable of making something else Tameh. To Rabbi Eliezer. And we will explain what the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer is. Ochel kamachal. That why does he equate the eater to the food? Kamachal atzmo, to the food itself. The dafka she'achal chatzipras. And we're going to say that it's specifically if he eats half a loaf. And shezeu shir ochlin tamein lifsel as hagavaya. That this is the amount that if somebody were to sort of stick it into your throat and you were to swallow it, that would make your body tameh. That ordinarily you need to touch the tuma, and we have a different. And if you were to touch the tuma, it would be an egg volume that could make you tameh. But when you eat, and of course, when you eat the tuma, then it's a different amount that is going to be problematic. Vehein shtei beitzim, and that's an amount of 2 eggs. The Kida Amar be'erevin, as we say in Erevin, da pei bed amar bet, aval b'negia lo metame ochel adam. But really, when it comes to just touching, a person cannot become tameh through touching food. She'ein adam b'kelim mitamin elame avatuma. That again, as I originally said, but then I was backed off it a little bit yesterday. In general, and certainly biblically, a person cannot become tameh other than through contact with an av hatuma, and same with vessels. They can only become tameh through contact directly. Now, we note that there are a variety of exceptions and rules that are associated with this that will, as we have seen over the years. But the bottom line is that that's the rule, and the rabbinic requirement here is that we're going to treat you like a shlishi because we're worried on some level that maybe the food that you will eat either will contact the food, the other food. For example, if you eat truma while you're eating this other food that is tameh shlishi, it will be a problem, and so for a variety of reasons, the rabbi said, we're going to treat you, at least according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to treat you like the food that you've eaten. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua says the following, Ha'ochel ochel rishon v'sheni. If you eat, Rabbi Yeshua, and again, remember, Rabbi Yeshua, so what we've just said, so I just want to back up and note that what we've just said is consistent with our answer to the question of how could we be talking about tameh hands in our Mishnah and the meat. Why is it only if the meat did not have blood that you can touch the meat? Why can't you touch the meat if you even if there was blood, given that the meat is Chullin? And the answer is that we're treating that meat like Kodesh. And because we're treating that meat like Kodesh, if you touch it with your sheni hands, that food will become a shlishi. And that is why Rabbi Eliezer needed to tell us what happens to somebody who eats shlishi food. That even though that shlishi food is not prohibited, because you are allowed to eat tameh food of Chullin, it just makes you it just raises potential issues. You have to be careful about it, but you are allowed to eat it. And so as a result, that shlishi food we are going to say it can make you a shlishi, and therefore the fact that it can exist as shlishi food shows that you need to be that could be what our Mishnah is talking about, where you said you're going to treat the food like kodesh, and therefore your hands that are a sheni can turn that food, even though it's chulin, into shlishi. Rebbe,
Yeah, why is it he's being machmir on himself? How can he
correct.
impose this on the entire community?
No, it's just on himself. Who said anything about the community? The
Oh,
point
I
is
mean,
that
I'm thinking he's
with
raising this for everybody else, but this is for
no,
himself.
it's just for himself. It's just for himself. For himself, this has now become shlishi. It's not clear whether it would be true for everybody else. Meaning, if well, I guess his food would be shlishi for himself, and therefore for everybody else. But if he were to do this, if he were to have, if he were to now touch your food would not become a shlishi. Your chulin food would not become a shlishi because he can't impose his restriction on
Right,
your food.
exactly.
So, so it isn't. So when you say for everybody else, yes, his food may be a shlishi for everyone, but from a practical perspective, it won't make a difference because a shlishi really doesn't cause problems except for in the Beis Hamikdash. So, as long as he doesn't take that shlishi food into the Beis Hamikdash, everything is fine. And again, the question of whether or not it could contaminate your food even your Kodesh food is an interesting question. But Rabbi Yeshua says that it cannot be a shlishi. The food cannot be a shlishi. Ha'ochel ochel rishon v'sheni. If you eat food that is a rishon or a sheni, then sheni, you become a sheni. Shlishi, if you eat food that is a shlishi, obviously some food can become a shlishi, and we'll talk about what that food is in a moment. Sheni l'kodesh ve'ein sheni l'truma. If you eat food that is a shlishi, the person who eats it becomes a sheni for kodesh, but does not become a sheni. And our implication at the moment is does not become tameh at all when it comes to truma. And what are we talking about? Unlike the Rebbe Eliezer's statement, Bechulin shenasu al taras truma, that we're talking about chulin that is specifically. I didn't share my screen. I apologize. We're talking specifically about chulin that is not prepared like kodesh of the Beis Hamikdash, but rather to be careful about truma because there's a second level. There are three levels. There's chulin, there's truma, and then there's kodesh. And so if you prepare food that is of a level that you're going to be concerned about it with respect to truma, then that is where a situation where the food could become a shlishi because truma is subject to being a shlishi. And so in that situation, you can have a shlishi, and in that situation, eating that shlishi would make you into a sheni with respect to kodesh, but would not make you a sheni with respect to other truma. And so the Gemara now makes the diuk al taras truma in. Only is Rabbi Yoshua making his statement with respect to one who adds the level of stricture necessary to keep truma tahor. But if you altaras hakodesh lo, but if you were to try to go so far and say that you're going to try and treat all of your chulin like kodesh, well then the whole rule would not apply. A resolution to treat one's chulin food as though it was kodesh does not cause it to take on the tumah properties of kodesh. Rather, it remains no different than ordinary chulin and cannot become a shlishi. So kasaber chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh leis behu shlishi. If you were to just have chulin that were made kodesh, so then it would not be a shlishi. And so since Rabbi Elazar and since Rabbi Yoshua does not apply a shlishi to food other than when you're going to be careful at the level of truma, he cannot be the author of our Mishnah. So the Gemara asks the question, the Lokma, why not? Why can't he be the author of our Mishnah? Let the author of our Mishnah be Rabbi Yoshua. And as we turn to Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph, B'chulin shenasu al taras truma of Rabbi Yoshua. Let it be Rabbi Yoshua, and we're talking about a situation where somebody is careful about the meat at a level that would be careful about truma. So lo salchataitik, you cannot think that. Yeah, you cannot think that. To katani basar, because our Mishnah is talking about meat. To ibit truma, because when is there something called truma basar miika? When you have truma, which is all food that produce that grows from the ground and is not meat, can you have meat that ever becomes truma? No, you can never have meat that becomes truma, and as a result, there, even if you were to say that you wanted to treat your chulin food at the level of and keep it tahor like truma, that would never apply to meat. And so as a result, that's why our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Yoshua. Elamai, but one second. So you're going to tell me Bekudshim that somehow, again, the other opinion based on Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, we're going to say that you can make Kudshim into a Shlishi. So, but Chaya, our Mishnah referenced a wild animal. Bekudshim Miika, do you have a Chaya that is ever a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash? No, you do not. So wouldn't, when you say that you're going to treat all of your chulin food like kudshim, wouldn't it similarly exclude the meat of a chaya because a meat of a chaya can't be kodesh? No, it would not exclude that. Basar bivasar michalaf. When it comes to meat and meat, you can get confused. And therefore, we would say that if you commit to keep everything Kodesh and you're following Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah that we cited in Taharot, well, then we're going to say that you can even have meat that could become a Shlishi. But basar beferi lo michlaf. But people don't confuse meat with produce. And therefore, if you're talking about somebody who is trying to keep the level of Tara associated with Truma, well, then that won't apply to meat. And so, therefore, we have our third potential answer. Again, it is following the opinion, not like Rabbi Yoshua, but like Rabbi Eliezer, that you decide to commit to make your food kodesh, a tahor like kodesh, and therefore your meat can even become a shlishi latuma, and therefore your hands that are a sheni latuma can make the meat a shlishi latuma. So Amar.
Wait, what meat are we talking about? The chaya
Well, it's
meat
any of the
mix?
meat of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah again talks about meat where no blood came out, and so, and implied that only in that situation can you eat it with hands that are a sheni latuma. And so, as a result, why can't you eat a chaya that you shech that has normal blood flow with hands that are misoavot? You can't eat it with hands that are misoavot because those hands are a sheni, and the person we're talking about has committed himself to keep all of his chulin food tahor like kodesh. And so, as a result, if he now touches with his sheni hands this chulin chaya, that blood came out and has become capable of becoming tamei, that chaya of meat will become tamei of a shlishi, and that's what we're talking about in our Mishnah.
Tell me everything. But we said before that the Revi, the Kodesh becomes Shlishi. We're saying
Well,
Kodesh.
it can't even kodesh. You have to be worried about even a revi. But our Mishnah was talking about dirty hands, and dirty hands are a sheni, and so we can be worried about dirty hands because it will turn that meat into a shlishi. Okay, so Amar Ula. So now Ula says, Chavrai Amrin, my friend said, B'chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh udulok Rabbi Yoshua. My friend said, as we answered a few moments ago, this was the answer that was given by Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Hoshaya. So my friends say, and we'll see who the friends are in a moment, because Tosfos points out that Rabbi Elazar was actually Ula's teacher, and so it doesn't make sense for him to be referring to Rabbi Elazar, and so we'll see who Ula was referring to in a moment. But the bottom line is that my friend said, as we just answered and just explained, that our Mishnah is talking about where somebody has committed themselves to make the bechulin shenasu al taras hakosh, that they've committed to make themselves all food, all of their chulin food is going to be treated with a level of tahara of Kodesh. And so as a result, your food can now become, your chulin food in that situation can become a shlishi. And so that was what our Mishnah was talking about. Udalok Rabbi Yoshua, and not like Rabbi Yoshua, because Rabbi Yoshua limits the situation of shlishi to only where you're concerned about the tahara level of truma, and says that when somebody's considered about the tahara level of Kodesh, it doesn't apply. V'ana amina Rabbi Yoshua. But I, Ula continues, I say that even Rabbi Yoshua could be this opinion. Because remember, how did we say that Rabbi Yoshua would disagree? Because we said that when we understood Rabbi Yoshua's statement, that what it was saying was the following. That it said, Bechulin shenasu al taras truma. That when he was describing his situation, he was referring to taras, where you commit to a level of tara of truma. And the Gemara made the deal, al taras truma in, al taras kodesh lo. That if you commit to a higher level, it wouldn't even make a difference. But maybe Rabbi Ula is telling us the lomi baikamar. Really, what Rabbi Yoshua is saying is it's not necessary. Lomi by chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. I don't even need to tell you that if you make your chulin like, if you commit to treat your chulin like kodesh with respect to keeping it pure, then of course it's going to create a shlishi. Dechamiri, because that's a very strict standard. Deisbahu shlishi. So of course there will be a shlishi. Ela afilu chulin shenasu al taras truma. But rather, even, and I'm sorry for not scrolling, now we're in Ula's answer, even chulin that you make to be like truma, it will also create a shlishi. Nami isbehu shlishi. And so as a result, even Rabbi Yoshua would agree that if you decide to treat your food like kodesh, your meat that you shecht and has touched blood can become a shlishi through touching by your unclean hands. And so now the Gemara goes back and says, Man Chavraya, who were the friends that Ula was mentioning? Rabba Bar Barchana. It's Rabba Bar Barchana. And as I mentioned, we say it's not the earlier opinion because that earlier opinion was not was a teacher of his. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabba Bar Barchana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Maya Hadre Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yoshua Lahadade. What did they respond to each other? And so as a result, Rabba Bar Barchana says, here is the conversation. Whether this is meant literally or figuratively, and it's important to note that this is being said by Rabba Bar Barchana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because we're going to ask a question on it shortly, and that is dependent on knowing that it was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So what was the response? How did the conversation go? So it went like this. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer lo Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Eliezer, who says that even if you say a higher level of kodesh, it can be kama shlishi. Matzinu, and said that basically what you eat is what you become, meaning a rishon becomes a rishon, a sheni becomes a sheni, and a shlishi becomes a shlishi. So matzinu ochel chamor min ha'ochel. We find in the Torah that in fact one who eats is more restricted than the item that was eaten itself. De'ilu nevelas of tahor b'chutz. When it comes to a nevela of an oaf tahor, of a pure bird, a kosher bird that you're allowed to eat, lo matame. If it is a nevela of a kosher bird and you touch it, you do not become tameh. Ve'ilu ochla. But if you eat it, now mitame begadim abes abliya. Not only do you become tameh, but your clothing becomes tameh. And so as a result, that's the situation, and that's a real issue. And so as a result, we see that that eating something can make a more restrictive situation than just touching. V'anu. So as a result, we have to make the eater at least as strict as the food. And so as a result, if you eat a rishon, we'll make you a rishon. Eat a sheni, you'll become a sheni. Eat a shlishi, you'll become a shlishi. Rabbi Yoshua, how does Rabbi Yoshua respond back? Minivlas ov tahor lo gamrin. You can't learn from an ov tahor to chidushu. It is different from every other case. It is not a. It is a novel kind of approach. It is not your typical situation. In general, the swallowing doesn't necessarily have greater restriction. Usually, the food is more restrictive than the one who eats it, because when it comes to the food causing tuma by touching the food, that only takes an egg of volume. But when it comes to eating the food, assuming you don't touch it, with your outside of your body, you have to eat half a pras. That's 2 eggs. So as a result, we see that the food itself is more strict. So how can we make the person like the food, as you were suggesting? So Rabbi Eliezer would respond back, Tuma mishiurin lo gamrinan. No, you can't determine the stricture associated with something based on the volume required. That doesn't work. That's not a basis to determine what is more strict and what is less strict. V'od, and moreover, lidvarecha. What did you say yourself? She'ata omer al rishon sheni yafe ata omer. Yeah, okay. I get that when you say that a rishon will make the person into a sheni, but sheni lama. You yourself admitted that if a person eats something that is a sheni latuma, that they themselves become a sheni latuma. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Yoshua responded back, no, Matzinu Shah Sheni, Osa Sheni, Al Yadei Mashkin. But we do find places where a Sheni makes another Sheni. For example, through a liquid. And Rashi explains, if we take a look, Al Yadei Mashkin, it's the first words on the, I think it was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Was he saying that he becomes sheni through before that? The line before that is sheni through eating sheni food.
Yes, so, that's exactly what he said. If we go back to the Mishnah itself.
So what's the kiddush then to say that he becomes sheni through a liquid? We already know he can become sheni through food.
No, he's explaining again. Rebbe Eliezer says that when you eat a rishon, you become a rishon. When you eat a sheni, you become a sheni. When you eat a shlishi, you become a shlishi. Rabbi Yoshua said that if you eat Rabbi Yoshua disagreed with that philosophy, and he said that the food is stricter than the person, and so as a result, when a person eats a rishon, they become a sheni. But he then said that if you eat a sheni, you become a sheni, and so Rabbi Eliezer challenged Rabbi Yoshua and said, why do you yourself admit that when you eat a sheni, you become a sheni? That's my philosophy. That's not your philosophy. Your philosophy is you eat a rishon, you become a sheni. So if you eat a sheni, you should become a shlishi. And so why do you say that when you eat a sheni, you become a sheni? And Rabbi Yoshua responds, I say, well, sheni is different because there is a situation where sheni turns something else into sheni. And what is that situation? It's where one sheni food touches a liquid that is on another sheni food. As we are going to see in Rashi, 9 lines down in the Rashi, beginning of the wide lines of, 9 lines down into the wide lines of Rashi, beginning of the line. Ayidei mashkin. Im naga ochel sheni. If you have food that is a sheni latuma and it touches other food, ba'ochel shehamashka tofeach alav, a other food that has a liquid on top of it, so you've got some kind of sauce. Nasu mashkin tchila, the liquid itself automatically becomes a rishon, and that's because any liquid effectively, rabbinically, turns into a rishon latuma. Kedektani va'azaz, we're going to see. Kol aposel es hatruma, mitame mashkin liot tchila. Anything that causes truma to become tameh will make a liquid into a rishon. V'chazer hamashke v'asa ha'ochel sheni. And now the liquid goes and turns the second piece of food, the food that the liquid was on, also into a sheni. But kaven de ashkachan al yedei mashka de sheni yos sheni. And now that we found a situation where basically a sheni turns other food into a sheni, b'shum duchta in some case machmarinan, we are going to be strict gabi adam ha'ochlo regarding a person who eats it also lemahave kavase that he also should be like that other food da'achila chamira mimaga because I'm the one because I say that eating is more strict than touching. And so I agree with you that eating is more strict than touching. And so as a result, in that situation, the person becomes a sheni. So Amar
But
Lo,
why didn't he also hold that if he ate a Rishon, he becomes a Rishon?
because that is not true for a Rishon. If a Rishon touches another food that has a liquid on it, and that food does not become a Rishon, that food ends up becoming a Sheni, because the Rishon Latuma ends up touching the liquid stays as a Rishon Latuma, and then the liquid touches the other food, and the other food becomes a Sheni Latuma also. So in that situation, you don't ever have a Rishon food making another food a Rishon food. And that is why, according to Rabbi Yoshua, when you eat a Rishon food, the person becomes a Sheni. Okay, so Amar Lo. So now Rabbi Eliezer says back to him again, continuing the conversation. Mashkin nami tchila havu. But 1 second, you're focusing on the food to food. But what about the mashka in the middle? The mashka in the middle becomes a rishon, and so as a result, you should be saying ditanana kol hapozel betruma mitame mashkin liyot tchila, that anytime you have something that would cause truma to be invalidated, meaning if it's at least a sheni, well then when it touches liquid, it makes that liquid a rishon latuma. So, but chutz mitvul yom, with the exception of a tvul yom does have the ability to invalidate truma, but will not make a liquid a rishon latuma. So and so as a result, why aren't you learning from the liquid itself and say that because this rishon can turn a liquid, because this sheni can turn a liquid into rishon, if you eat the sheni, you should turn yourself into a rishon. Moreover, va'od shlishi sheni lama. When it comes to a shlishi, you said that the shlishi turns the person who eats it into a sheni. Why would that be the case? You never have a situation where a shlishi turns something into a sheni. So Amar Lo, and this is the key line for the entire conversation and why we brought it, and how we know that Rabba Bar Bar Chana disagrees with Ula and says that Rabbi Yoshua limits his rule only to a case where somebody just commits to do tahar, to say that something is going to be tahor like truma, and does not apply it when you say that you're going to keep something tahor like kodesh. And so Amar Lo, af ani lo amarti ella, and this is the end of the second to last line on Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph. Amar Lo, Afani, Rabbi Yoshua is responding. Afani lo amarti ela betruma. The only situation where I apply this rule is in truma. That if you commit yourself to treat all chulin like truma and keep all your chulin tahor because you're concerned about truma, well then you will have a shlishi, and that shlishi will, if you eat it, will make you a sheni in connection with kodesh. And the reason that I'm concerned about that is shetaharasa, because the purity associated with being careful for truma, tuma he eitzel hekdesh. It is when you then move that attitude to hekdesh, that is constitutes tuma, meaning you have to be more careful with kodesh than you do with truma. And therefore, if you are used to engaging only in truma, we are going to be concerned that that item that you're engaging with is tameh, and we will say that we will treat it as tameh vis-a-vis hektish, because you have limited your restriction to truma and not to kodesh. And so as a result, that's how we know that in fact Rabba Bar Bar Chana would disagree with Ula. He would not say that in fact Rabbi Yoshua's statement was a lomi bai ka'amar, and instead he would say that in fact it's a complete machlokes. I mean, it's only true when you say that you're going to keep food tahor like um, truma. And that was exactly what we answered first at the beginning of today. Again, that was the answer, and it's important to remember this. That was the answer offered by Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Oshaya. And so as a result, now we have, again, we've explained who Ula disagrees with and how it all works.
So who's the one more strict here, Rabbi Yeshua or Rabbi Eliezer? But then I thought you said just the end there, Amar Lo, that's Rabbi Yeshua.
Yes, Rabbi Yoshua. So the problem is they each have aspects that are more strict than the other. Because Rabbi Yoshua would say is less strict because if, according to this understanding of Rabba Bar Bar Chana in this conversation, it would be less strict. Because Rabba Bar Bar Chana would say the following. He would say that if you commit to treat your food like Kodesh, it cannot become a shlishi. And therefore, you can touch with your dirty hands even food that was shechted and had blood come out. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer would say, no, if you commit to treat your food like Kodesh, well, then if blood comes out and touches your meat, you have to, you cannot touch it with your dirty hands because your hands will turn that meat into shlishi, and that's a problem. Okay, so that's a way in which Rabbi Eliezer is more strict than Rabbi Yoshua. On the other hand, we would have a situation where Rabbi Eliezer ends up where Rabbi Yoshua ends up being more strict because he says that if you eat a shlishi, that you become a sheni with respect to Kodesh. Whereas, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you eat a shlishi, you become a shlishi. And so as a result, a shlishi can only make Kodesh invalid. It can't make the thing that you make invalid cause tuma to apply to something else. But according to Rabbi Yoshua, when you eat that shlishi, you become a sheni, and so now you can not only make the next item tameh, but you that item that you make tameh can make kodesh invalid. And so as a result, that's a restriction that Rabbi Eliezer would have, that would Rabbi Yoshua, would have over Rabbi Eliezer. And so as a result, you can have strict restrictions in both directions. Both Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer each have aspects to their opinion that are more strict than the other. So now we're going to make a series of statements of Amaraic rulings, and the first one is going to be said and raise a question based on the fact that it's said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So let's take a look. So statement number one. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Ha'ochel Shlishi Shel Chullin, Shenasu Al Taras HaKodesh, Nasa Gufo Sheni LeKodesh. That when it comes to Shlishi that was made, actually maybe what I'm saying is not true, because this is just saying okay, but in any event, it may be that it's only that Rabbi Eliezer is only more strict than Rabbi Yoshua and not the other way around. But in any event, ha'ochel shlishi b'shal chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. If you eat shlishi of chulin that you prepared with the attitude that it is going to be treated, that you're going to keep it tahor like kodesh, and now it is a shlishi. So nasa gufo sheni lekodesh. Then your body will become a sheni for kodesh. Now note that that was essentially what Rabbi Yoshua said, but Rabbi Yoshua said it limiting it to the situation of limiting it to the situation of chulin that was prepared with a tara level of truma. So Ase Rabbi Zera. Well, let me back up and say two things. One is that I think actually what my comment that there's a restrictive element to both Rabbi Eliezer and to Rabbi Yoshua is correct. And now, within this opinion that we are now citing in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yanai, is within the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua, because he's saying that you eat something that is a shlishi and your body becomes a sheni. And so, Esvei Rabbi Zera Rabbi Asi. Rabbi Zera asks Rabbi Asi, how can you say that? Meaning, I'm quoting you, and now, but I realize, how can you make that? How can you have made this statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yanai? Shlishi, sheni l'kodesh ve'ein sheni l'truma. Your Rabbi Yoshua says that when a person who eats a shlishi, they become a sheni with respect to kodesh, but they do not become a sheni with respect to truma. And he said, "Bechulin shenasu al taras truma," and he said that this statement is only applying to chulin that was prepared with the level of truma, implying, as we saw earlier, al taras truma in only if you apply the level of restriction associated with truma will your food potentially become a shlishi. But al taras hakodesh lo. But the implication is that if you were to try to keep your chulin food, holy and pure at the level that you would need to keep Beis Hamikdash food sacrifices, it would not work. You would not actually cause your food to become a shlishi. And isn't that the implication of Rabbi Yoshua's statement? So Amar Le, so he said back to him, Rabbi Asi responded, no, exactly as Ula said, Lomi Bai Kamar. When Rabbi Yoshua said his statement, he was saying it was not necessary. Meaning, it's not necessary to tell you that, of course, if I were to try to keep the strictures associated with Kodesh, my food could become a shlishi. But even if I try to keep the restriction level only to the level of keeping my food pure at the level that would be pure for truma, even there I could have a shlishi. So now the Rabbi Yeshua says, but now the Rabbi Zera responds, af ani lo amarti ela betruma kamar. But 1 second, what about Rabbi Bar Chana's quote? Because Rabbi Bar Chana said, take a look at Rashi, af ani lo amarti kamar. The Rabbi Bar Chana amra lahach ahadarta the Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbi Yoshua, mishmei the Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bar Chana said that his conversation was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, meaning Rabbi Yochanan agreed that this was the nature of the conversation. And what did he say in that conversation? Rabbi Yoshua limited his comment only to where you keep the restrictions level of truma, and said that if you keep the restrictions level of Kodesh, you would not be able to create a shlishi. And continuing back on Rashi, last of the narrow wide lines at the top, the kasha to Rabbi Yochanan and the Rabbi Yochanan. And so we have a question within the view of Rabbi Yochanan, because you are telling me that Rabbi Yochanan would apply shlishi to chulin that was prepared at the level of Kodesh. And Rabbi Bar Chana would say that Rabbi Yochanan would say that shlishi does not apply to chulin that was prepared at the level of kodesh. So Amorai Ninhu Ba'aliba de Rabbi Yochanan. You know what? You're right. There are two Amorayim that disagree about what Rabbi Yochanan would say, and one is Rabbi Bar Chana. He would say that Rabbi Yochanan limits Rabbi Yoshua's view only to where you keep the restrictions of truma, and would say that if you keep the restrictions of chulin, it means nothing, and you do not have a shlishi for that chulin. Whereas, according to Rabbi Asi, it would be even according to that Rabbi Yoshua would say, even if you try to make your food tahor like kodesh, there too you can have a shlishi for chulin. And so as a result, we have a machlokas. We have, on the one hand, we have Rabbi Asi and we have Ula. And on the other hand, we have Rabbi Rabbi Bar Chana and Rabbi Elazar. And so as a result, we now have this two-way dispute, two parties in each case, as to whether or not Rabbi Yoshua limits his rule to where you keep it kodesh like truma, or whether he would even apply that rule to where you keep it kodesh, keep it tahor like kodesh. Again, where he limited, everybody agrees that it applies when you try to keep things tahor like truma, and the debate is whether or not, if you keep it tahor like kodesh, would you also be able to have a shlishi of chulin? Okay, so that was statement number one, Amoraic statement number one. Amoraic statement number two, and with that we will conclude. There'll be a third one, God willing, tomorrow. Amar Ula, ha'ochel shlishi shel chulin shenasu al taras truma. If you decide that you are going to keep the level of tahor tahara associated with truma, well then, nifsal gufo mila'echol truma. If you were to eat that shlishi of chulin, that you would now disqualify yourself from eating other truma. As Rashi explains, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down into the narrow lines of Rashi, Lamedal, and Mabed. B'chulin shenasu al chulu. Kedeparishis, as I explained early, de b'shlishi shel chulin, that by eating a shlishi of chulin, elu ka'amar ha-shlishi l'truma, that ilu kamar hashlishi l'truma, if we had said that this was a shlishi for truma, havi, I'm sorry, okay, sorry. Bechulin shenasu al the b'shlishi shel chulin elu ka'amar hashlishi l'truma habi. That the point is that if I say that I'm going to treat food that is like truma, and so as a result, I can now have food that is a shlishi with respect to truma. It's a shlishi l'tuma, and as a result, it is going to invalidate truma. The kaven de shlishihu, because this food is now a shlishi, pasul mikre. It is called pasul, meaning does not have the capability of making other food a revi, because a revi doesn't exist with respect to truma, but it is invalid as for truma itself. The nehi de matzi leminga betruma. And so while it is true that this food could touch other truma without creating a problem, Michal, you're able to do it. Mia lo matzi achal. You cannot eat it. And if you were to eat it, it would be a problem. And essentially, it would effectively cause you to be prevent you from eating other truma, because you effectively yourself become a sheni, and now as a result you cannot eat any more truma. So
does he become a sheni or a shlishi? That food is shlishi, right?
That food is shlishi, and
so
again,
this is
under Rabbi Yoshua. This is according to Rabbi Yoshua, and we saw at the very beginning that Rabbi Yoshua says that if you eat Rishon or Sheni, you become a Sheni. One who eats Shlishi becomes a Sheni for Kodesh, but not a Sheni for Tuma. So the point is you become a Sheni for Kodesh, but not a Sheni for Truma, meaning that although you're not a Sheni, you are going to be a Shlishi. And so as a result, you're going to be effectively a shlishi, and therefore you cannot eat it. Now we're going to see exactly how that plays out right now. So
he can't eat truma. He could eat chulin, though, right?
Correct. He could eat chulin.
But
so
could he eat kachim?
And no, for kachim he would be a sheni, and so as a result, he would even touching kachim would be a problem. So my kamashmalan. But what are you telling us? Tanina, we effectively learned it, because what did we say? Shlishi, sheni lakodesh ve'ain sheni latruma. That if you're a shlishi, if you eat a shlishi that was prepared at the level of for tara of truma, you become a sheni for kodesh, but you do not become a sheni for truma. So bechulin shenazu al taras truma, and we said that this is referring to chulin that was prepared at a tara level of truma. So sheni hu de lo havi, hashlishi havi. What's the implication of you're not being a sheni? It's that you're not a sheni, but you're still going to be a shlishi. So no, and so isn't that basically what Rabbi Yoshua was saying? So why is Ula telling us any kind of chiddush? No, it is a chiddush because if it was just from Rabbi Yoshua's statement alone, hava meaning lo sheni havi, the lo shlishi havi. I might have thought that he's not only not a sheni with respect to truma, but he's not even a shlishi with respect to truma. Va'idi to amar sheni b'kodesh, amar nami ein sheni b'truma. And since we needed to tell you that the guy has that when it comes to the level that the person has to treat himself with respect to kodesh is as a level of a sheni. Well, that's why we're going to tell you that when it comes to the level that he needs to treat himself with respect to truma, that he does not need to worry about himself as a sheni for truma. So kamash malan, but really he would not even be a shlishi. But kamash malan, that is why Ula is telling us that in fact he becomes a shlishi for truma, and that means that he's not allowed to eat truma. So Esvei
But
Rav
through
Amnuna,
Yeshua, we said Yeshua becomes a sheni.
he only becomes a sheni with respect to kodesh. He does not become a sheni with respect to truma. Instead, with respect to truma, he becomes a shlishi.
Becomes a shlishi with respect to truma. So there he can't eat truma.
Correct. So let me read that Rashi again. The 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. B'chulin shenasu al kedebarishas, as we've explained. De b'shlishi shel chulin elu kamar. That when it comes to this shlishi of chulin, right? Again, you have chulin that is treated as a shlishi because you've imposed on it the restrictions associated with truma, and now it itself is a considered a shlishi. So ka'amar, we say about it, ha shlishi litruma havi, that this person who now ate it is considered a shlishi for truma. The cave in the shlishi who, and since he is a shlishi, puzzle mikre, we call him invalid, meaning that he's not allowed to eat truma. And yes, it's true, Michal, and yes, it is true that he is capable of touching truma without causing it to become tamei. Mia lo matzi acha, but nonetheless, he cannot eat any truma. That's what that. My apologies for not explaining that Rashi correctly the first time. So that is the basic attitude that Ula is teaching us, and he's teaching us within the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. And we are understanding that opinion is and we're understanding how that opinion works, because the person would be considered a sheni with respect to touching kodesh, but he's only a shlishi with respect to touching truma, meaning that he can touch it, but he cannot eat it. So,
if he touches it, does the product become? Does the truma become puzzle then?
No. If he's a shlishi and he touches it, nothing happens.
So therefore, if he touches that truma, another Kohen could eat it, right? The truma doesn't become tamei.
Correct. Ese Rav Amnuna le'ula. So Rav Amnuna challenges Ula harishin shebechula tamei u'mitame. When you have this is a Mishnah, the next Mishnah in Tarot, Mishnah Gimel of Parak Bet. If a rishon touches chulin, it makes it tamei, and that tamei chulin can make something else tamei. Vasheni posel ve'eno metame. But when it comes to a sheni l'tuma, it can invalidate truma, but it does not make it will that thing that is invalidated truma will not be able to make anything else contaminated. V'hashlishi nechal b'nezida dema, and a shlishi can be eaten with a stew of truma. Well, one second, you just said that a shlishi, if it is eaten by a person, the person becomes a shlishi and therefore is not allowed to eat truma. But now we have this stew that it contains truma, and it is going to have and you can eat it. So how can you say that you can have shlishi tuma and eat it with truma when you told us that if you ate the shlishi you can't eat truma? The Yamar nifsal gufo milecho betruma, and if you say that it's talking about that his body becomes disqualified from eating truma, sefina le midi de puzzle le gufe, how can he eat it? So Amar le hanach l'nezid hadema, you can leave that to the side. The lake of Kazayas Achilas Pras, because there the amount of truma in that stew was less than the amount that you would have be able to eat within a Kedei Achilas Pras, and therefore you would not be able to eat an olive volume, and therefore it would not be a problem in the Shlishi situation. If you had a Sheni or a Rishon, then that would be a problem, but here we only are a Shlishi, and in that situation, it's not a problem. We're going to have to stop there.
Well, does he put aside
in.
just the random
Sorry, I have to
part?
stop.
Just set aside
I'm
one.
sorry.